Welcome to Poker Fundamentals. This is chapter 2. Today we're going to be looking at flop textures, which is essentially how many ways can we categorize different flops. And there's quite a lot, to be honest, but we're going to try and keep it simple again. So we're looking at the same situation. The hijack's raised 2.3x, the big blind is called. And now instead of looking at this flop, what I'm going to do is go to flop reports. This is a really cool feature of GTO Wizard where you can look at every single possible flop that there is. At the moment, I'm filtered to the boards that we lead the most. And if I click this, it will filter it to the boards that are pure checks. And you can kind of see there's this graph where it's just all green. So until you get all the way down to here, this is nearly every single flop. There's just no leading. It's only like this now. It starts to kind of creep up at the bottom. You can see leads starting to happen. It doesn't get to 10% frequency until here, and then there is the few boards that we want to lead quite a lot. It still never gets to more than 50%, but very quick takeaway, the boards that you lead the most are 3 to a straight in a row. 765, 543, 654. We have lots of offsuit straights. It's a decent board for us, but still we only want to lead for a third part. It's not like we want to go crazy. If you just want to simplify your strategy and never lead, that's completely fine. But the thing that I wanted to look at here is this filters tab. This is the way that we want to think about flops. We've got rainbow boards, so that's any three cards that are different suits. There's no flush draw possible. We've got flush draw, pretty self-explanatory. There's exactly two of the same suit on the board, so someone can have a flush draw. And monotone, which is a flush is already possible. There's 3 to 1 flushes the board. These boards are a lot rarer. Then we have whether the board is unpaired, paired, or three of a kind. Three of a kind boards are super rare. And then we have connectedness. So I'm going to go to disconnected and not paired, just so we can get a real sense of what that means. Disconnected still means gut shot is possible, but it looks like there's no open ender possible. Jack 7-3, you can have a gut shot, but you can't have an open ender. That's the main way to categorize this board. Disconnected board, gut shot draws are possible, but open-ended straight draws are not possible. Next one, open-ended straight draw possible. So pretty self-explanatory. It's possible to have 4 in a row to a straight. So anytime that there's 2 cards with 1 gap, that's going to be possible, or anytime there's 2 cards in a row, like a 2 and a 3, a 4 and a 2, 8 and a 6, an 8 and a 7. Obviously, there's infinite examples of this, so I'm not going to go through them all. A lot more likely a straight is going to complete on the turn. And last one is connected. So again, pretty self-explanatory given what the other 2 categories of connectedness were, but this means that a straight is already possible. It's really important to be thinking about flop textures because it's going to really determine the way you play your range. Because, for example, let's take the first board on the connected boards, which is 965, and let's take a look. I'm just going to open this in a new tab as if we've opened the hijack, the big blind is defended, we've got the 965 board, it's a connected board. And one of the first things to note here is look what aces is doing. And by the way, all of these colors are just bet sizes. The solver is checking 40% of the time. That's quite a lot. It's even checking with aces, top pair sometimes. As soon as your top pairs and over pairs can be nearly drawing dead because someone can have a straight, you have to be a lot more careful at this particular stack depth. If we change the stack depth, it might change the way you play your hand. You might need to be more or less careful because once the pot is so big, it's going to kind of force our hand sometimes. If you only have 20 big blinds here and you've got aces, it might be the case that, well, if they've got it, they've got it. The pot is so big that I'm just going to try and maximize my value against the worst hands. Whereas when you're 40 big blinds deep, well, there's only 6 big blinds in the pot. If all the money goes in and I've got aces, they've probably got either a very strong draw or a hand that already beats me, or they already beat me, they're very far ahead. So on connected boards, we've got to be careful. Let's compare that to open-ended as possible. So let's take a random board. I'm going to look at 932. So in this case, we don't need to be careful because if we've got aces, if we've got kings, if we've got pair, we're pretty delighted with the situation. The solver's only checking 15% of the time now. So this is one of your first heuristics. If strong hands are already possible, we need to be more careful. If they're not possible yet, we don't need to be careful. This is pretty simple. Now let's look at the same board, except now there's a flush draw. So I'm just going to change this 3 to the 3 of hearts. Instead of a rainbow board, now we're looking at a flush draw board. You can see now we're checking even less of the time. This is a little bit complex, but I'm going to touch on it already. The main difference between a rainbow board and a flush draw board is on a rainbow board, you can have 3 backdoor flush draws, therefore 3 different suited combinations that kind of connect. If we look at the 932 rainbow, the big blind can have diamonds, clubs, or hearts, which all have a backdoor flush draw. Whereas if we now change this 3 of diamonds to the 3 of hearts, now hearts are obviously a lot happier on this board. Clubs are as happy as they would have been before, but the other suit is gone. So there's now 2 suits which are completely unrelated to the board. If we look at a quick situation of the hijack bet's the most common size, which here is 1/3 pot. Obviously the king 8 of hearts, very happy. It can raise, it can call, it can do what it wants. And the king 8 of clubs is a backdoor flush draw, so it's kind of there, like it can call sometimes, maybe a bit of raising sometimes. It can get spades, can get diamonds, well they're nowhere to be seen, they're completely gone. So that's just one example, whereas now if we go back to the 932 with the 3 of diamonds, and we look at that same hand, king 8, well, now king 8 of diamonds is also there. So this is pretty important. It's how many auto folds you get from your opponent's range. So now I've explained all the different flop textures. I'm going to deep dive into them all individually and group them together. So we saw on the connected board, we need to be careful. Let's look at betting frequencies from the hijack's point of view. So I'm going to do big blind check. This is still every board. You can see there's a 16.4% check frequency from the hijack. That's another really big heuristic. If you open as the hijack and the big blind calls, you check 16.4% of the time on a combination of every possible board. So if you're ever not sure about a spot, you should bet, because just by the law of probabilities, it's more than likely going to be a bet, or at least be a bet sometimes. Whereas it's a lot more rare that you're going to be in a situation, if you're not sure, that the hand is just always a pure check, because it's a lot less often that hands are going to be pure check. So when in doubt, c-bet. The most common size is 20% pot. If you wanted to do 25%, 33%, it's not going to make a big difference. Choose whatever size works for you. If you just decide, okay, if I'm not sure, I will c-bet 25% of the pot in this situation, you can't go wrong. People are not going to exploit you for that. Later on in this course, we are going to talk about how we can exploit people that do this, and you'll see that it's actually a lot more difficult than people realize. Look at this check frequency, get a sense of these bet sizes. So we are doing a little bit of overbetting, 125% pot. Not very often. Some boards it's going to crop up more than others. But as a general sense, we're not doing it too much. And yet there are some boards where our check-in frequency gets above 50%, but it's going to be rarer. There's a lot more boards where our bet frequency is just 100. It's just a range bet, or it's negligible difference. To me, if it's less than 5%, then it's very negligible. So all of these boards, it's never going to be a big deal if you just bet with your whole range. And as we get more and more, it's going to become slightly more of a deal, but only if people know you're doing it and they know how to exploit it. It's quite rare for both of those facts to be true. And as you develop your strategy, you'll find ways to identify boards where you should check sometimes, which hands to check. But for now, keep it simple, bet with your whole range. I'm going to add a filter and see what happens. So remember these global frequencies. This is 16.4% check, about 33% betting tiny, about 22% betting small, about 15% betting like just over half pot, and then the 80 to 125% bets about 13% of the time. And I'm going to filter this, and I'm going to add just connected boards, and let's see how it affects the global frequencies. For a start, this is 18.5% of boards are connected. So this is significant. About 1 in 5 times you're going to come up against a connected board. And already you can see your check frequency has gone up. 26.6%. And you can see the comparison to the entire range here. You're checking 10% more of the time. That's quite a lot. That's more than 50% increase of the strategy of checking. You're betting small way less often. You're betting a third, about the same. Okay. You're betting half pot way more often. You're doing this overbet slightly less. You're doing this about the same. The main difference here is there's more checking, and the bet size is kind of bumped up. So that's kind of a heuristic that we can take already, that when you're having a developed checking range, it makes more sense to bet bigger, because the range that you're betting is not your entire range. Remember that as well. If you want to bet your entire range, probably makes sense to bet small, 20, 25%, maybe 30% pot. If you want to have a check range, if you want to check 25% of the time, maybe more, it might make sense to have some bigger bets, because the range that you're saying you've got has already been condensed slightly. Remember what we talked about dilution in the first video. You're not saying I have every single hand I open with anymore. You're saying I'm checking sometimes, so when I bet, I'm now in this portion instead of the entire portion, so therefore bigger sizes can make sense. This is actually currently filtered to the boards we check the most. So let's have a quick look at those. The 765. So you'll notice this is the boards that are good for the big blind to lead. Pretty good checks. This strategy is also going to assume that the big blind has a leading range. Maybe in reality they don't. So if you look at these boards, 765, really bad board for us. 763, pretty bad board. So 7 high straight possible, 6 high straight possible, 8 high straight possible. All these boards where we're checking over half the time are low connected boards. I haven't seen any card above an 8 yet, and we've scrolled down pretty far. And their first board, it's 976, so it's the same stuff. It's low to middle, it's straight possible. We want to heavily consider checking on these boards. And you'll also notice the small bets don't exist. Let's just look at rainbow connected first. What's the takeaway here? 7 high, 6 high, 8 high, 5 high, straight as possible. Bad boards for us, we want to check a lot. You can see the check frequency is dropping off very quickly, very, very quickly. So it's gone from like checking 57, now checking 40, now checking 30. It goes down so quickly, and that's now there's the 9s on the board, the 10s on the board. As soon as there's a card above an 8 on the board, even if it's connected, it isn't actually as bad as it looks for. Like Jack 8-7, Ace 3-2, like these boards now are at the 25% frequency, and then quickly we're going to get back to range betting as soon as the boards gets higher. So let's look at the other side. Let's look at the least checks. These are the connected boards that are range bets. You can see it's Broadway boards, because remember when we looked at that range to start with, this is why it's so important to always think about your range. We had every single Broadway combo. We had every offsuit Broadway. We had every suited Broadway. Anytime there's free cards above a 10 on the board, it's going to absolutely smash us, because all of our offsuit hands, which are the hands that we're weighted towards, are really going to hit the board. Like this one, like Jack 9-8. We can have Queen 10 offsuit. That's 12 combos of the nuts we flop there. Maybe he has 10-7 offsuit, but he also has King 2 suited and like all these trash hands. So he's massively diluted away from the nuts. We have a much more condensed range, and even the hands that don't hit this board, we're going to have 2 overs. We're going to have a gut shot. We're going to have a lot more top pairs. So yeah, all these high card boards are great for us. It's worth thinking about why they're so good for us, and it's a product of the range. The solver actually doesn't know who the pre-flop aggressor is. It's not because we raised and we're the aggressor. It's because this is the range we've got and this is the range our opponent's got. The solver has no idea who the pre-flop raiser is. It doesn't think about the game that way. It just thinks in terms of ranges. And even ace-5 too, I think that's because 4-3 offsuit folds as the big blind, so the straight isn't a big deal here. So that's worth thinking about too. If your opponent doesn't hit the offsuit straights because they should be folding them pre, then that's actually going to make a difference to the strategy too. 10-9-8, we've got all the queen-jack offsuits, we've got all the sets, we've got loads of suited two pairs, we've got loads of 2-overs and straight draws. Now we've come full circle and we've got back to the 8 high and lower board. That's a really big takeaway from connected boards. It's not the fact there's a straight possible. It's a lot to do with how these offsuit Broadway hands are doing, because look how much we still bet on all these high card boards and we check a lot on the low card boards. The fact that we have all of those offsuit Broadways is clearly a big deal for this part of the strategy, because all of our king jack offsuit, queen jack offsuit, queen 10 offsuit, these type of hands, when the board is 8 high or lower with a straight possible, they are absolutely trash. It's another good way to think about how much trash do we have on this board, and even though our opponent is going to miss the board a lot too, being the big blind, we're still so far behind when they have something that we can't just get away with betting our whole range anymore, or even half of it in some of these boards. The next thing I want to quickly look at is connected flush draw, just to see how much differences are going on here. And same story with the range bets. It's all these high cards. I can see lots of picture cards, or it's ace high wheel where they don't have the wheel straight. Yeah, it looks like exactly the same story. 9-8-7, we can have jack 10 offsuit. And then around here, now we're starting to check more and more. And this is 10.4%. So this is still a lot of boards connected flush draw. If we quickly go back, let's just check the check frequency, how it changes flush draw compared to rainbow. So that was 26.7 and 26.3. So there's not the biggest difference there. Finally, let's look at connected monotone. Monotone is obviously a lot rarer. There's 1.2% of boards in monotone. We actually check a lot more on these boards. We check 31% of the time. Again, high cards, mainly betting, and then as the boards get lower, 6-3-2, Jack 10-7. One of the driving factors here is the fact, because the big blind calls every suited hand, remember what we talked about with range composition? They have every single flush possible except for like the ace king and ace queen suited, because those would raise. Every single other flush is possible. Having said that, they have the free suits that whiffed as well. For example, on 6-3-2 all hearts, they've got every king 7 suited, sure, but there's diamonds, there's clubs, there's spades, and they're all hands that are going to auto folds. Monotone is a lot of just bet small, clear out all the auto folds, and then kind of go from there. But obviously on connected boards, they are going to connect more often. We are still going to whiff more. Because we have a lot of offsuit Broadways, these hands are going to kind of hold their own more, because we're going to actually have a flush draw with the offsuit Broadways on these boards that can do something. It's harder to find heuristics with monotone. I think I'm going to look at monotone separately. The 8-7-6 is the highest check, the 7-6-5, 7-6-4. It's very similar. As the board is more connected and hits your opponent more, they flop more straights, they flop more two pairs with offsuit hands, more pair and open enders, more checking. We've gone over connected boards. Pairs are not relevant on connected boards because the straight's possible, it can't be paired anyway. We've looked at rainbow, we've looked at flush draw, we looked at monotone. We've got a sense of how to play the connected boards. The next boards are going to be more complicated. I'm going to break this down even further. I hope that gives you a good sense of how to play connected boards in this situation, hijack versus big blind. And we're back next week. We'll look at more of these different flop textures and see what heuristics we can generate from this situation. Thanks for watching.